So lovely to see some familiar faces, well, not faces, but names on the roll call. We can't see your faces, unfortunately, but we are so delighted to have you all with us. A very warm welcome to this PJ Library event. Just some housekeeping. Please feel free to write thoughts and questions in the chat. We'll spend some time afterwards answering questions if there are. I have a little boy who's getting braces tomorrow, and he was getting more and more anxious as the evening wore on. And so we sat down and read a story, because there is nothing quite so comforting and quite that says everything's going to be fine. I love you. I'm here for you. Like sitting with a story that takes you many miles away in the warm lap of your mom. And I think it's this magic that helped me to fall in love with books from a very young age. And of course, a lover of books to this very day. My name is Batia Bricker. I'm the GM of Books and Brand for Exclusive Books. I'm a publisher and soon to be author, a bibliophile, an educator, and a passionate advocate for the PJ Library program in South Africa. The spirit of PJ Library is to capture that magic. It's to get more Jewish books for children into Jewish homes and to ensure that Jewish books form a strong backbone of a home library. Since its inception in 2018, with the help of the dynamic PJ Library team and of course some very generous donors, PJ Library has been able to give over 24,000 books to children in 5 cities in our country. The PJ Library books are read and enjoyed. The stories provide a means of connection between parent and child, history and the present, values and then everyday life. And hopefully the lessons and the tales go on to become fodder for dreams, for aspirations, for new goals and wishes. And that is the power of PJ Library, the power of stories. But today we live in a post-pandemic world or COVID world, digitized in nearly every respect, overloaded with information at every turn. Our conversation is around 21st century learning, change, resilience, growth mindset. Does the construct of a story, quaint and classic, remain the invaluable tool that it once was? Is it a traditional tale? Is a traditional tale with beginning, middle, and end of any consequence in navigating our confusing and challenging 21st century world? To help us unpick this question, we are honored to be joined by Natalie Barnett, community leader, educator, consummate volunteer, and chair on numerous committees and boards, also a passionate champion for the PJ Library program, and I bet you didn't know this, a zoologist to boot. Natalie is known for her superpower of seeing the bigger picture and integrating various aspects for the greater good. She got that from books, I think. No matter the educational environment, working with children and adults, she has always used storytelling as a powerful tool. To tell us more, here is Natalie.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining tonight. And apologies for having to postpone the webinar from last week. I'd like to start by dedicating tonight's talk to the memory of my uncle, Paul Salkis, who passed away last week. Besides being an incredibly loving family man, he was a master educator and storyteller himself who impacted the lives of countless people. And we just may he rest in peace and wish his family long life. Once upon a time, the familiar start to many a captivating tale and which holds the key to so much more than meets the eye. Stories have been used for thousands of years to hand down learning and knowledge and have the transformative power and potential to bring about change. Tonight, we're going to explore why stories are so powerful and how we can use them to connect, color, and bring meaning and strength to our lives and to those of our pupils, children, and grandchildren. Before we actually begin proper, I'm going to ask the organizers to please put up the poll, because I think it will be very interesting for all of us to see who is on this webinar, whether you are attending as a teacher, a parent, or as a grandparent. So if you wouldn't mind filling that in, and then hopefully we can share the results. I also have to do it. Maybe I'm an interested other. Oh, we can't vote.
You're definitely an interesting other.
Let's see what happens. So just a couple more seconds for you guys to fill that in. And then it'll be valuable for me to know as well who I'm speaking to. Okay, brilliant. So 51% are parents, we've got 27 teachers, 27% grandparents, and 24 interested other. Some of them would overlap as well, because you might have a teacher who's a parent. Great. So thank you very much, and we can now close that. So I now need to share my screen just for 1 sec. I'll get used to this. Okay, so we're going to be discussing this power of storytelling and how we use storytelling to raise and teach our children. And I think the first thing that we're going to have to do is become present. And just so that you know, everything that I'm doing within this webinar are things that we can use when engaging with our own children or our pupils. So the first thing is we will become present. And then I'm going to be sharing some of my own experiences with storytelling. And we're going to use those to think about some of the different types of storytelling that exists. After questioning what it is that children need to thrive in their lives, we're going to discover the effects of storytelling on the brain, and then try to understand how those can be harnessed to develop the skills required to cope and thrive in our lives, and some take-home ideas and tools. And then to end off, we'll open up for questions. Oops, I'm not keeping up with myself. We're going to open up for questions and conversation. So I don't think Batya mentioned this, but if there are questions, please will you post them in the question and answer section, and we will hopefully be able to engage with them afterwards. Okay, so now I have to stop sharing. No, so okay, I didn't realize that we weren't going to be all on camera, but what I wanted to say, let me stop sharing. Okay, give me 1 sec. Is that we all need to be present, and especially since I actually can't see you except for Batya and Andy, it's really important to know that there are other people in the room. And yeah, so I just want you to please try and focus on me, turn off any other distractions, and think about what it is that I'm saying. So to begin, I'm going to ask you to find a comfortable position and just sit quietly with your eyes closed. And we are going to begin by rubbing our hands together and creating some warmth, placing them either over your heart or your eyes. And this is the way that we're going to connect through this webinar, sharing the warmth in our Zoom webinar. And now you can just rest your hands gently in your lap and take 3 deep breaths through your nose and sigh audibly, even though you're on mute, through your mouth. And then take a double inhalation through the nose and an extended exhalation through the mouth. And I'd like you to now imagine a wide road stretching out in front of you, where you see bright green fields extending away on the left of the road, and to the right, a lush, dense forest. As you begin to walk down the road, you notice a child up ahead, walking alone. You're curious about the child and you observe from a distance until they suddenly turn off the road and into the forest. Your heart begins to race as you feel this is not a place for a child to be venturing by themselves, and you decide to follow. The thickly interwoven branches overhead darken your way, but you are easily able to follow the crackling of the leaves and sticks underfoot as the child moves ahead. The temperature begins to drop and you feel a light, damp mist on your skin. You're beginning to rather enjoy the tranquility of walking through the forest, and you realize now that the sound of the footsteps has ceased. Slowing down, you see the child illuminated in a clearing, kneeling at the edge of a still and calm lake, peering over at their reflection. You slowly come closer, and leaning over, you expect to see the child with you mirrored behind, and instead, you notice a crowd of faces shimmering on the water's surface, all smiling and with twinkling eyes. The child beams and turns to face you, reaches out and says, "Thank you. I always knew you had my back." You return their gaze warmly. You breathe in the scent of the moment, and gently you open your eyes. One of my first recollections of storytelling takes place when I was 2.5 years old, and my mom was soon to give birth to my sister. I remember her telling me about the baby in her tummy that would soon be coming out, how she wasn't sure if it was a boy baby or a girl baby, but that my brother or sister would be a friend to me. She didn't want me to worry about when she went away to the nursing home, and she would help her. They were going to help her there, and then she would be back soon. So I was fully prepared when the day arrived, and I'll never forget my dad returning home to tell me that I had a little sister. He described what she looked like, how she sounded, loud, and he even took me to the parking lot of the hospital. I wasn't allowed in, where I looked up to see my mom standing by the window and holding my baby sister in her arms. I was so excited to welcome her home a few days later, and she still is my best friend. Being read to by our parents was a daily occurrence, and our mom was a teacher who understood the importance of reading to us at a young age. Bedtime was especially exciting, sharing books, or sometimes having our dad lie down next to us, whispering enthralling tales that he pulled from his imagination. Another one of our most thrilling treats was sitting curled up next to our grandpa in his big armchair, where he regaled us with the adventures of Pink Dragon and his trusty friends Swallow and Ant, and his tools of sulfur and brimstone. There was always just the right amount of fear of the evil Black Dragon, who was up to his usual mischief, combined with the problem solving by the three friends on how to overcome Black Dragon's latest tricks, and relief when together they managed to save someone or something. A most memorable and impact story from our school days was about the journey of a potato through the digestive system. We were learning about the enzymes that break down food in the various organs of the body, and how the potato encounters all sorts of mechanisms and fluids that break it down as it travels from the mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach, intestines, colon. Suffice it to say, there was great excitement from me and my classmates when it finally came out of the other end, completely transformed by its journey that contributed to our sustenance. But I think I connected even more strongly to that potato after visiting a potato farm with my friend, belonged to her grandparents. And I could then add to that story by describing what had happened to the potato before it arrived in our grocery basket. And I recall everything so vividly about that lesson, and I realized what a brilliant teaching method it was. Growing up Jewish, we were exposed to many of the stories from Tanakh, the Bible, and obviously one of the most important is that of the Exodus from Egypt at the annual Pesach Seder. We are told to tell the story to our children, and in such a way that we ourselves feel the experience of being slaves in Egypt. We were also immersed in real life stories, one of the most important being that of our grandmother's escape from Germany, Spain, and France, and finally arriving in Rhodesia to marry our grandfather without having previously met. Santa's story is one of courage, love, loss, overcoming adversity, and resilience. Later, I began using storytelling myself. It began at Ikamvala Bantu, a community-based organization in the townships, where I set up a development through play program for carers of children aged 5 and 6. Getting educational and development ideas across to people with limited English, because my isiXhosa was even more limited, and teaching skills was a very challenging task until I devised a story. When I brought a doll called Themba into the workshop, all the carers immediately identified with him. And as they learned new skills, so different parts were added to Themba's body. By playing with blocks, Themba's concept of spatial awareness would grow, and this was depicted by adding arms to his body. Playing with tiny pigs developed his fine motor coordination and eyesight acuity. And these were represented by adding fingers to Themba's hands and eyes to his face, and so on. And he became a whole person by going through this learning experience. By telling this story of Themba attending school and playing in such a way, these women were able to much more easily understand the importance of their training and implementation of the program in their classrooms. I was then introduced to a powerful program which educates people about HIV and AIDS. It was called the One Boki program. And I was so impressed with its success in both business and personal environments that I enrolled to become a trainer. And how the message is put across again is through storytelling, weaving a tale to which the audience can relate and thereby bringing them into a situation and making it real. I shared stories with many staff members in schools, management of organizations, parents of children, grade 9 learners. Every time, because the story was very similar to situations that they could have found themselves in, they were able to identify with the story and through it created a strong awareness and understanding of HIV. Then, inspired by my grandmother Santa's story, I joined the Holocaust Center as a volunteer guide. And there are thousands of students who pass through this incredible institution each year, presenting a powerful opportunity to teach them about intolerance, prejudice, assumptions, stereotyping. But it really is an overwhelming experience for these 14 and 16-year-olds to be taken through the exhibit. And I realized here very quickly that to use stories, yet again, would help me to connect with them and make it real and get them to identify with the millions of victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. Storytelling isn't only used for children, or that's what we're focusing on tonight, but it's frequently used in the workplace as well. Workshops for leaders and management highlight how everyone has a story to tell. And by telling that story, it unlocks all sorts of potential for people just as a person or a manager, a worker, or a CEO. But back to the children. Based on my own upbringing, storytelling became a very significant aspect of raising my own children, whether the usual bedtime stories, puppet shows, birthday parties, and encouraging them to tell us stories and of their own various experiences through words and drawings. Another experience of mine was attending Foundations of Jewish Family Living. It's a course developed for parents and teachers by the Melton School of Adult Jewish Education, where master stories from Jewish tradition are brought to life, and they highlight the profound values and messages that they convey. And after studying the stories, we were encouraged to retell them to our own children and students, which really helped to reinforce the ideas in each of the lessons. In addition, we were introduced to PJ library books, sharing the same themes and or values that the master stories were giving across. As a mother who had always sought out good Jewish reading material for my children, and it was quite difficult to come by, I was overjoyed to discover that through providing free monthly Jewish content books, PJ Library supported families in their own Jewish journeys. Despite my children being older at the time, we all enjoyed reading through those books together, discussing traditions or the meaning, cultural similarities or variations, all through the medium of story and illustrations. Okay, so enough of my anecdotes and onto the crux of tonight. So let's have a look at what children need to succeed. Stories have many structures, and we don't have time for that, but most of them involve some sort of issue or dilemma or a mystery that engages the listener and that is eventually solved or comes to some conclusion. So in our story tonight, the issue is, what do our children need to thrive? And hopefully we'll come to some conclusion through storytelling to solve that problem. So if you could all think about what you feel are important qualities that children need to succeed, please won't you type them into either the chat or the questions and answer section so that we can share and pick some of them to discuss. In the meantime, while you're doing that, I'm going to share my screen with some of the things that I've come up with and learned. I can do that. Yeah. Okay. It would be helpful if it would let me share. Yeah, sorry guys. And also, Batya, would you mind reading some of the, if there's anything in the chat? Oh, here it is, I can see. Okay, there's some things. Great. Okay, a safe place. Great. I'm going to touch on that in a second. Resilience, standing up for others, courage, kindness, self-worth, a dilemma, optimism, problem-solving skills, good role models, ability to overcome difficult times, emotional regulation. Okay, these are super. Thank you so much. Lovely to be able to share in some way. Okay, and one of the other ways that we can think about what is important to children, what they need, is some of the most common questions they ask. So as we know, why is definitely one of those. And that for us is about this curiosity that they have. And the questions is to find out as much as they possibly can, facts, information, how things work. And we know that they are like sponges and they just want to know more and more and more. One of the other questions that I came up with that my children ask regularly is, when will we get there? And I think here this is something to do about some of the things that were mentioned in the chat, this emotional regulation, thinking about the fact that there are others involved as well. It's not just about themselves, and also to some degree about control. And one of the favorites was, why does he get to stay up later than me, or you, Ma? Why do I have to go to sleep now and you don't? And this, I think, presents a beautiful opportunity that they do have to go to sleep later, but this is a great time to actually be sharing our storytelling. So some of the things that I've put down, and yes, we've shared as well, and I'll go back to the chat quickly just to see if there was anything: delayed gratification, wanting to be liked and have friends. Was there anything extra? Allowing imagination to develop, absolutely great. So some of them that I've listed here are what you've repeated, I'm repeating what you guys have said: love, safety. You can see my screen, right? But if you can just tell, right, okay, confidence, a sense of identity and belonging. We're going to go through these and unpack them a little bit. Knowledge and resilience, which you guys have mentioned. And then I just want to go through what share. Sorry, I'm hitting the share thing. Just give me a sec, not the share. One of the other things. So Sir Ken Robinson, who unfortunately recently passed away, is the most unbelievable educationist. And he wrote a book called Creative Schools. And he shared 8 competencies that schools should be developing in children in order for them to thrive. Just giving me one more chance to try and share this. Okay, so you're going to have to forgive me and I'll just go through them. Let me stop sharing and try and share again. Just see. So, there we go. Sharing one more time. because it is interesting to have a look at them. Right. Okay, well. Okay, so curiosity, and someone said imaginative thinking. So the ability to explore how the world works, and just develop their unique capacities for, that comes under creativity, for creative thought and action. Criticism. So this isn't being like criticizing and judging other people. This is the ability to analyze information and critical thinking and ideas to form reasoned arguments and judgments. Anything more that I want to add there? So separating fact from opinion, a sense from nonsense, making sure that it's something that it's real as opposed to make-believe, and looking at honesty compared to deception. Then communication, we know, is really important, and the ability to express one's thoughts and feelings clearly and confidently in a range of different ways. Collaboration, today, teamwork, without it, and being able to work constructively with others. You know, there are things that we can do alone, but it's really working with people that brings out the best in us, and we can rely on others to help us where our strengths are not lying. Then compassion, and I think here where he says the ability to empathize with others and act accordingly, it's much more than that. It's also knowing about our feelings and our emotions, which then leads to composure and how to actually regulate those feelings and emotions, the ability to connect with our inner life, but also that sense of balance and peace and harmony so that we can behave better towards other people. And then citizenship, which I think also encompasses community, the ability to engage constructively with society, community, and participate in processes that sustain it. So as well as what you guys have added in the chat, and I thank you for that, and mine here as well, these are some of the others. And I want you to think about them with regard to the stories that I told you about how my life has been impacted, and then when we go through now the actual power of storytelling. So I'm stopping the share and just going back to my notes. Give me one sec. Okay. So what actually is storytelling? For tens of thousands of years, from at least like the first cave paintings, telling stories has been one of human beings' most fundamental methods of communication and motivation. Every culture has its own stories or narratives, and they are shared for many reasons. Some are just for fun or as a means of entertainment. Some have the specific aim of passing on information for education purposes. Often they are told as a way to describe different behaviors and instill moral values. And in many instances are used for cultural preservation, where stories pass on specific knowledge and traditions. Some stories are forgotten within minutes, but others have survived for thousands of years. And as Jews, we know this well. Not only are we known as the people of the book, but we are the quintessential storytellers. As illustrated in my Melton anecdote and with our Pesach Seders, whether it's through the Tanakh, written or oral law, and the Midrashim that explain all of those, or the Maggids, the storytellers whose job it is to share, or was to share, Jewish narratives and folk tales. The importance for us is passing the stories, tradition, and culture lador vador, from one generation to the next. Stories come in all different sizes and shapes. Many are told verbally, prevalent in our everyday conversations. If you think about just when we're telling people, oh, listen what happened to me, their books, their songs, their poems, their theater, movies, adverts tell stories. We've now got blogs and vlogs, their cartoons, jokes, memes. We're all drawn to them because the wonderful thing about stories is that they have meaning for everyone, both children and adults, no matter their age. They are the true equalizer, because not only do we all enjoy them, but we all have our own stories to tell. While the importance of story hasn't changed over time, there has been a huge shift in who tells the stories. More and more since the last century, storytelling has been taken over by mass media, especially through television and video games, and more recently through social media. And this has changed who tells the stories and how they are told. Where previously it might have been the parents, the teachers, rabbis, grandparents, authors, they were the ones who told the stories in person to their audiences, whether it be children, family members. They are now competing with this multi-million-dollar digital production directed by teams of Hollywood and video game script writers, producers, directors, and gamers. And as prevalent, if not more influential, are the stories told by random people, and often our children themselves, using social media, as Batya mentioned, social media platforms such as Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. So whereas stories used to be heard or read, mass media stories now are delivered with a wide array of audiovisual effects. And while they used to be slowly making their way through a society, mass media stories now are spread to billions of people all over the world in a matter of seconds. And we've seen how impactful these can be. The Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, and so on. This generation of children is exposed to more stories, more powerfully presented than any in history. Some are good, but many are not. And we as parents and teachers have to be more careful in choosing our children's media stories. We also need to arm them with the digital skills to tell the stories that reflect their values, not those trying to influence them for their own gain. And as Plato said, those who tell the stories rule society. Our values, desires, prejudices, and behavior are all influenced by the kind of stories we are exposed to. So we, as the parents, grandparents, teacher, have every opportunity and the responsibility to tell our stories to our children, to ensure that the culture we would like to continue for them is defined by us. So now we need to go on to a little bit of a scientific thing, why stories are so powerful. And I have to share my screen again, which takes a bit of time. Ooh, where did it go? Sorry, let me just see. Oh dear, I've lost it. Here we go. Okay. And if I can just go on to, can you see it? Yes. Okay, let me just go onto it here. Just going to have a little look at the brain. Okay, so there's a scientific reason to do with the way that our brains works. When we hear facts and information, the language processing parts of our brains are activated. So you can see there's Broca's area, and there's the Wernicke's area with language processing and language comprehension. However, when a story is told to us, not only are the language processing parts activated, but so are any of the other areas in our brain that we would be using if we were actually experiencing those events happening in the story. Those are activated as well. So if someone tells us about a certain smell, our olfactory cortex lights up. If it's about running down a hill, our motor cortex gets active. So if you think back to the visualization that I took you through in the beginning, some of you, depending on how strong your imaginations are and how well you listened, and also based on your previous experiences, you may have felt that you were actually walking through that forest or that mist, cool mist on your skin. A story puts the whole brain to work, and this leads us to become completely immersed in the content. And when these parts of the brain are activated, the listener is able to turn that story into their own ideas and experience. Let me stop sharing again. Have I stopped? I can't even see the Zoom now. Okay. And to get back. Okay. So when the brain does this, and experiences an emotional moment, dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone and a neurotransmitter, is released. It makes it easier to remember whatever caused that experience with more accuracy. So if you told a whole lot of facts as part of a story, you are actually 20 times more likely to remember them. Because more of the brain is involved, stronger memories are created around that story and the lessons. So it's a very powerful learning tool for kids and for grown-ups as well. Memory and understanding are enhanced, and that leads to a deeper learning, as I spoke about in some of my experiences. So also, when we engage in positive social interactions that resonate with us, like storytelling, another hormone, oxytocin, is also released. It's known as the love hormone, and it creates feelings of trust and connection with others, and we actually feel as if we are part of something greater than ourselves. So through this release, stories are actually able to change behavior. A good story releases oxytocin, and we feel empathy and compassion, which in turn causes us to take action and motivates us to actually work with others or to make a difference in somebody else's lives. So through scientific research, we know that stories can activate the brain. But why does that format of a story where events unfold one after the other have such a profound impact on our learning? And this is because human brains are wired that way. A story is broken down into the simplest form. It's a connection of cause and effect. That's exactly how we think. If this, then that. If that, then this, and so on. So whatever we're doing in our lives, we are actually constantly subconsciously telling ourselves stories about every action and conversation we experience. And when we hear stories, we try to link them to one of our own similar experiences that evoke similar feelings. That's why metaphors and messages are so easy to use in inculcating values and behaviors, since we naturally link them to our own stories of cause and effect. There's also a mirroring that can happen in the brains of the storyteller and the listener. And by simply telling a story, ideas, thoughts, and emotions can be planted in the listener's brains. This is where the importance of critical thinking comes in, that we spoke about, where questions need to be asked. Because as you can hear, if stories can be so persuasive, they can also be used for brainwashing and propaganda. And as we said, these days, stories on social media are so compelling and attractive that even we adults can be sucked in. So it's all the more important for children to recognize that they need to question stories critically, to ascertain whether they really do relate to them, or are they simply being manipulated into thinking that they do through the power of the story. Just a quick sip. During these uncertain COVID times, we are unable to predict and plan as we used to. Our routines and familiarity have fallen away, and we feel like we are no longer in control. So it's now more than ever that we and our children require resilience. And there was an interesting study that was done on the role of story and ritual in United States families, where children were asked questions about their family history, like, do you know where your grandparents grew up? Do you know the story of your birth? And it was found that by the capacity of the children to answer those questions, the researchers were able to predict the children's sense of control over their lives, their self-esteem, their resilience, and the belief in the strength of their own families. And it was explained that recording their families' histories, resilience is built, and children and teenagers develop a very strong identity and sense of belonging to something that is actually greater than themselves. Interestingly, the research showed that the type of storytelling that was most powerful in building resilience were those that had what's called an oscillating narrative. In other words, complex stories full of ups and downs, challenges and achievements. And although they may be complicated, the common thread that emerges for children is that despite trials and tribulations, we have unique strengths. And as families, we are always there for one another. So, just if we think about our Jewish narratives again for a minute, they follow many of the characters through their whole lives, and we're able to observe the decisions that they make. But these aren't all stories of perfect individuals. They are actually tales of real people. And it's the same with Hasidim a certain sect of Judaism which particularly emphasizes sacred storytelling, mostly about tzaddikim, but also being righteous people, but also countless inspiring tales about the noble deeds of common people. And when we know that one of these characters that we read with and that we learn about has struggled with something in their lives, we are able to enter that conversation and relate it to ourselves. They are all oscillating narratives. And we are so fortunate to have them as part of our rich heritage to share with our pupils and children. So I think now particularly it is really a good time to reach out and be reminiscing with your children about times gone by, whether it's on Zoom or in person, just telling those imperfect stories of the good times and the bad and how they were overcome. And then chat about current episodes that you get through together and that will carry you and them forward. So I'm going to wrap up now and just think about some of the things that we've spoken about, and I'm sure you've made a lot of connections. I will share my screen one more time. And just move through this. So firstly, being present. And one of the ways that you can do that is through like the visualization that I said, or just by breathing. But give them the attention they need. Show them that love by giving that attention, and remove distractions so that they're actually focused on what it is that you are engaging with them. And allow storytelling to become a part of daily life. It's relaxing, it's enjoyable, and it also, as some of you mentioned as well, and Batya too, with her son, for example, preparing him for what he was going to be going through. It's a source of comfort and of strength, and being able to calm yourself and regulate emotions. And it also can just be as simple as talking about your childhood or sharing a funny story about your day, just connecting and bonding. Ask them open-ended questions about your stories and about their interactions. Encourage that curiosity and creativity. That you can answer some of their questions, but let them think about it themselves as well. And then think about themes and lessons that emerge from books or just something that you heard or something that you experienced, and discuss it with them. It gives them a depth of understanding and meaning. It develops their social and emotional learning, how to interact with others, how to feel within themselves, and then also to collaborate, as we said, that teamwork that was so important. And again, to repeat as what Batya said, and my mom, when my little sister was going to be born, tell them stories that will prepare them for upcoming activities or challenges. There's nothing like something familiar to make you feel in control. And then instead of asking them about themselves, if they're going through something difficult or something's happened to them, ask them about stories in the characters in the story. What do you think they were thinking or feeling when something happened, or they behaved in a certain way? And it helps them to open up where they might feel insecure or emotional, and then be able to influence their decisions and their behavior. Sometimes we could ask them to tell their own story, or read you the story if they're at that age, or draw pictures about a story. Show them that they too are teachers and have the power to tell stories. And you can record yourself telling a story. We've still got recordings of my mom reading to my kids, and they love it. We keep the questions and the discussion included, and they play it back and they hear themselves, and then they can reflect on them and think about what emerged from them and how they can use it. Make a photo book of interesting images, or family members, tell them stories together, let them tell the stories. It's just a wonderful way, again, to bond and share. And then also, whether you're a teacher or a parent, just creating ritual around it. And there's some ideas here which you can read for yourselves. But they anticipate it, and they enter a familiar environment, and it just brings about all the good feelings and that oxytocin that telling and listening to a story brings about. Okay, so I hope I'm not sharing anymore. So I just wanted to ask now, with regard to that poll, I know that it said that some of us were teachers and not all of us, but what I want to reiterate is actually we are all teachers. we've all got stories to tell. And so to end off, I'm actually going to ask a question that we need to take away with us. And during this time that we've just been through of the Jewish New Year, accounting of our souls, what do we want to do to improve? I think what we could do is walk away now knowing this power of storytelling, to think about which stories are we telling about ourselves, to ourselves and to others. And let's think about letting go of those that don't serve us well, holding on to those that motivate us and delight us in life, and then find new stories to become even better. And then tell those stories to our children, our grandchildren, and our pupils. And hopefully they will then be able to live as happily ever after as we have raised and taught them to be. So thank you very much. And hopefully we can have some questions or a little bit of discussion, but I'm going to hand that over to Batya.
Natalie, thank you so much for your passionate, informative, riveting presentation, but also the wonderful stories. You took us to dragons, Exodus, potatoes, baby sisters. That's the versatility, I guess, of telling a story. But I love the idea of being curators of our own stories and being careful about the stories we listen, the ones we hold on to, and the ones we then pass on. We're really in control of that narrative. You're in control of your own story. And I love the idea of that. Natalie, I know there are going to be perhaps questions and comments, but perhaps you could talk a little bit about the PJ Library model for storytelling and sharing stories, because it's been very carefully thought out and curated to facilitate those processes.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the things that blew me away when, I mentioned how I was introduced to PJ Library, but then I actually became involved in it, and thanks to Viv Anstey and to King David Schools, who actually brought it to South Africa. This is their framework. So they talk about mirrors and windows, and the mirrors are being where you look at the books. Obviously they revolve around books, but look at stories that are similar to yours. Obviously they're not going to be exactly the same, but those are the mirrors where you see similarities. But then they also focus on windows. So although it might all be about Jewish stories or values or cycles, which I'll get to in a sec, there are different ways of practicing Judaism, and there's diversity that comes into it. And that's the windows where you can actually look out and see those who are different from us and learn about different cultures and different people. And then the other thing that they do is they have a content framework where they focus specifically on Jewish values. So it's this relationship with oneself, then extending to a relationship with others, and relationship with God, and how to develop that within children from a young age. The next framework is on Jewish cycles. So they look at family moments and milestones, Shabbat, the Chagim, holidays, and then Jewish customs and objects. And then lastly, it's Jewish narratives that I spoke about quite a bit: Bible, other Jewish texts, Jewish people and Jewish places, and Israel. And, it's just the most fantastic way for grandparents, teachers, parents to be able to share their common heritage and legacy with their children, grandchildren, and pupils. So I think most of the people on here would know about PJ Library, but if you don't, you can definitely get in touch with either Batya, Andy's on here as well, look at our Facebook page. And just as an example, which my sister reminded me about this morning, Something from Nothing is the most incredible story actually about storytelling, and really how you don't really have to have anything to be able to tell a story. You've got it within you. So I'm not going to spoil the story, but I would suggest sharing that with your children as well.
One of the participants in the chat, oh goodness, I'm losing my cursor here, just spoke about you, and a warm thanks and tribute to you, Natalie, but also just about how storytelling really builds the whole person. And that whole person creation is both for the reader and the listener. Madeleine L'Engle said that stories make us more alive, more human, more courageous, and more loving. And I think that at a time when we're so starved of connectedness and belonging and a sense of self, when we're most hungry for those things, even though we have all the information in the world, that's certainly the role that stories can play, stories and books, and of course, PJ Library. So a very big thank you to you, Natalie. Thank you to everybody for joining us. And thank you to everybody for spreading the word, because that's how movements happen. That's how stories happen. I think if you have any other comments that you would like to make or questions, I'm sure Natalie is happy to do that offline. There are many, many thanks to you in the chat. And thanks to you all. And please God, a good, healthy, happy year for us all.
Thank you so much. Thanks for, well, I invited myself actually, but thank you for hosting me, and thank you to everybody, and wishing you all Shana Tova. Thank you.